All right, 8.1 and 8.2 sticky note lecture. Here we go. So first off, central case study with this, talk about China's two-child policy versus the one-child policy and kind of the time bomb of how big their population is getting and how it continues to increase. Okay, it's really kind of interesting talk and write-up basically about how now they're getting sex skewed, meaning there's way more males than females and the cost of that on their society, which is a pretty interesting read. Okay, so starting at page, I should have written this first, 187. Okay, so we're talking exponential versus logistic growth. Okay, exponential growth basically just keeps on going and keeps on going and keeps on going. They basically don't reach carrying capacity, whereas logistic growth reaches carrying capacity. Okay, we've talked about that in a little bit of our discussion yesterday, or today, excuse me. We've talked about that in biology as well. And one of the things I want to talk about is appreciate how big 1 billion is. Because when we talk about our population being at 7.8 billion, it's hard to kind of comprehend a size of that or a number of that magnitude. And to the right over here, it has a really good description of it. Basically, talks about, you can see at the very top there, how big is a billion. Okay. So one of the things they basically ask is basically how long would it take for a banker to count out $1 million if she did it at a rate of $1 a second for 8 hours a day, 7 days a week. Okay, that would take her 35 days. But counting $1 billion would take her 95 years. So like a billion is just, it's so much larger than a million. Like it says here, living a million seconds only takes you to 12 days, but living for a billion seconds takes you to 31 years. Like a billion is just astronomically bigger. So when you talk about like people that are billionaires versus millionaires, a billionaire has so much more wealth. Okay, so now page on 188. Okay, it's talking about population growth varies widely around the world, around the globe. Okay, so there's obviously good things for it. There's obviously bad things for population growth. So the good thing is that invention or necessity is the engine that drives innovation. So new inventions are made because people need them. You know, typically inventions aren't made because of convenience. You know, like there are some that obviously are made that way, but typically things are invented and things are innovated because of necessity. It's kind of the driving force behind it. Now, population growth can also be a bad thing, as we've discussed, that resource depletion. You know, like the environment around us is degrading because of how many people we have. Okay, disease can flourish because we're more densely populated. Disease can therefore transmit easier. Okay, conflict arises like wars do, because basically, if one country runs out of resources, they're going to go find those resources, which is potentially going to be warring with another country over them. And if species are extinct, we obviously can't replicate them. Okay, we can't bring them back from extinction. Okay, there's good things for population growth. There's obviously bad things for population growth. You know, like computers and technology, and literally what we're using to do school this year was born out of necessity. Okay, page 189. Let's talk about the IPAT model, or impact equals the population, their affluence, and their technology. Okay, if you have a huge population but you have neither of those, your impact's kind of low. If you have a huge population, you have a lot of influence but not much technology, your impact's going to be higher. But if you have all three of these, like most westernized countries have today, your impact is going to be very big. Okay, you could also, I wrote there, S can also be added in for how sensitive a region is. So it could be IPATS. So certain regions are more susceptible and they can't come back as easy once they're disturbed. Okay, China is a good example of all this because China has population, they have affluency, they have technology, and that some of the area where China covers is a very sensitive area as well. Okay, now we're going to be switching on to demography or demographics. Okay, this science behind the story is a good one because basically can we map out a population's environmental impact? Yeah, we can. And it's kind of an interesting kind of read because you can see just how much the environment is being impacted by the population. Okay? So this is talking about carrying capacity, which I'm confident you guys learned in biology, so I'm not going to go into too much details. But basically, there as humans, I hope we're going to reach the carrying capacity. I don't know where that carrying capacity is. Like I've talked about, personally, I feel like we're over carrying capacity, but you can make the argument both ways. Okay? So basically, the population rises, find carrying capacity, and we'll kind of waver above and below the carrying capacity for a while. Okay, 192. So total population is important, but population density is more important. Okay, so overall population is obviously a big thing, but the more densely populated a region is, the more impact they're going to have on the environment. And like you can see, Beijing, 14,000 people per square mile compared to Seattle, we're at 8,000 people per square mile. So if you're in Seattle and you think we're packed in, Beijing's almost double what that is. Like literally, you're running into people on the sidewalk. And I visited Beijing a couple of years back, and it was incredible how packed in they are. Okay, age structure diagrams. We've saw videos about this. We saw animations about this. We've talked about this. You need to know how to interpret this. You need to know which one shows slow growth. You need to know which one shows negative growth, which one shows rapid growth, and so on. Okay, the top shows it really clearly as well. Okay, increasing rapidly because there's a lot of people on the bottom, or the younger ages. Whereas population decreasing, meaning that the people on the bottom or that are about to get to childbearing age, there's less of them compared to the higher age groups. Okay, so you need to know these really well. Be able to identify stuff, be able to interpret it, and so on. Okay? So where are we at? 194. Age structures can put tremendous strain on government services. We talked about that, or we heard about it a little bit for Japan. Their age or their age structure is getting much older, which means, think of America. If our population, the majority of them are getting older, Social Security and Medicaid and all those social services for the elderly are going to get strained a ton. And that's happening in our country. But think about Japan's country, which is worse. There's basically less workers comparatively that can't support the economy, so less taxes are coming in and so on. So the strain on the economy is about to happen big time because a lot of the population is elderly and they need the government's help. Now, sex ratio is also a big one as well. Impacts on societies. Okay, the case study in the very beginning talks about basically if you have a whole bunch of males that are unwed, they're basically bachelors, kind of the impact or the negative impact that has on society. And it sounds bad, but bachelors typically actually aren't good for society. They're very much kind of looking out for themselves, is what they are, in on average. Not necessarily the same for everybody, but on average they are. Now, infant mortality rates can be a judge of society's wealth, because if the infant mortality rate is high, the society typically doesn't have that much money. But if it's low, that shows the affluence of the country. So like this chart down here, you can see that basically the infant mortality rate is right there. The higher infant mortality rates are typically in the poorer countries. Okay, so it's basically kind of a judge of the society's wealth because if necessary, the government and society's wealth can kind of step in to help those children that are potentially dying because of childbirth or through childbirth and the younger years. Okay, so now we're on 196. Okay, now even though the nation's fertility rate is going down, and we're talking about China here, the population size is still rising. And I wrote why there just to kind of hammer home the point of what we talked about today. Even if the child rate, or the birth rate goes down, the population rate is still going to go up. Because, if you're moving from 5 kids per female to 3 kids per female, the population's still increasing, just not as much. Okay? The TFR, okay, which is defined right there, the total fertility rate. Okay? So it's basically lower in developed countries, so like more westernized countries, because women have more of a role in society. Women have an opportunity to have their own career. So basically, women have more choice in family planning. That's why it's much lower in developed countries. And we saw that in the video. Okay. Page 197, this stage here, or this graph here, I wrote know these stages well. I'm talking about this. Okay. So we got pre-industrial stage, transitional stage, industrial stage, and post-industrial stage. So pre-industrial, okay, you can think of this as typically like the poorer countries around the world. They're in a pre-industrial stage. They have high birth rates and they have high death rates. Okay? As the countries move along to the transitional stage, you can see death rate declines due to increased food production and improved medical care. So the death rate starts to decline, but the birth rate is going to stay high. And so right here, this is where a lot of the population boom in poorer countries really occurs. Okay, then you reach the industrial stage. You can see birth rate declines due to increased opportunities for women and access to birth control. And like I was just talking about, women have more roles and they have more choice in family planning. That's what's going to cause the birth rate to decline because they're going to want to pursue their own career. They're going to want to, experience life outside of the house. So they don't want to have to take care of 5, 6, 7 kids. They want to take care of like one and 1 or 2, and it's later in life as well. So the birth rate starts to decline. Then you reach post-industrial stage where it starts to kind of go back and forth, or the birth and death rates are low. Okay? This is typically, like I said, where more kind of westernized society is at this point. Okay? Women are having a bigger role, so therefore their family planning and birth rate's low. The death rate is low because of our affluence as a society. All right. So now we're going to basically the last page here. Okay, demographic fatigue. This is on page 198. Okay, this is when populations put too much strain on government resources. And like we just talked about, with population getting much older, or like the majority of the population getting older, the healthcare costs for that section of the population is going to go way up. Okay, but there's also demographic fatigue, meaning if you have a lot of kids in the younger age groups and you all need to educate them, that's going to cost a lot of money to educate the entire or the younger portion of the population when that's a majority of the population. Okay, that's demographic fatigue. Just like last time, put a couple questions in so we have stuff to talk about.